The impossible mission begins. The desert sun blazed down on Captain Ethan Walker as he adjusted the scanner on his wrist. Sandstorms howled in the distance, their golden clouds swallowing the horizon. He had landed on Vorlax 3, a lawless planet filled with criminals, smugglers, and outlaws. His mission was clear: capture the most wanted fugitive in the galaxy. Thyravel. Ethan narrowed his eyes at the device in his hand. It beeped, showing a moving red dot. She was close. He had spent weeks tracking her across planets, but every time he got near, she disappeared like a ghost. This time, he wouldn't let her slip away. He stepped into the bustling marketplace of Korgeth City, a chaotic mess of neon lights, rusted metal stalls, and aliens selling everything from stolen weapons to rare alien pets. The air smelled of engine oil and strange spices. His comms device buzzed in his ear. "Walker, do you have her location?" It was Commander Bryce from the Galactic Enforcement Unit. "I'm on her trail," Ethan muttered, scanning the crowd. "I'll have her in custody soon." "Alive, Walker. We need her alive." Ethan sighed. That was the hard part. Thyravel wasn't just an outlaw. She was a nightmare to handle. Stubborn, fast, and always one step ahead. Suddenly, he saw her. She was sitting on the roof of a cargo speeder, chewing something casually. Her silver hair glowed under the neon lights, and her sharp violet eyes scanned the crowd like a predator. She looked relaxed, like she had all the time in the world. Ethan moved fast. He leaped onto the speeder, reaching for his cuffs. But Sarah was faster. She smirked and kicked him hard in the chest. Ethan lost balance and crashed onto a pile of crates. Aliens and merchants cursed at him, but he ignored them. Syra laughed. "That was pathetic, human. You're supposed to be the best." Ethan groaned and stood up. Enough games. He grabbed his stun blaster and aimed. Not this time. Vel. Before he could pull the trigger, Syra flipped backward off the speeder, landing gracefully on the street below. She whistled, and two armed aliens appeared beside her. Ethan cursed. She had backup. The aliens raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Ethan grabbed a metal pipe from the wreckage and swung hard at the first one, knocking his gun away. The second one fired, but Ethan ducked just in time. Idara, watching the fight, smiled in amusement. "You're not bad," she said, crossing her arms. "But you're still too slow." Ethan lunged forward. Zyra dodged, but this time, he was ready. He tackled her, pinning her against a metal wall. She struggled, but he was stronger. "Game over," Ethan muttered, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Zyra's smirk didn't fade. She leaned closer and whispered, "Are you sure?" Before Ethan could react, she pressed a hidden button on her belt. Boom! A massive explosion shook the entire city. The force sent Ethan flying backward, crashing against a broken-down hover car. His ears rang. Smoke filled the air. He looked up, his heart pounding. His ship, the one he came in, was in flames. Syra, still handcuffed, stood nearby, watching the fire with a smirk. Ethan's stomach sank. He was stranded. She turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Now what, Captain?" Ethan clenched his fists, realizing the horrible truth. He had captured the galaxy's most dangerous outlaw. But now he was stuck with her, handcuffed to a menace. The smoke still rose in thick, black plumes as Ethan pulled himself up from the wreckage. His ears were ringing. His lungs burned from the dust in the air. And worst of all, his ship was gone. Flames devoured the hull, and the once functional cockpit was now a twisted mess of metal and shattered glass. He clenched his jaw, turning to face Thyravel. Even with her hands cuffed behind her back, she stood there grinning, watching the destruction like it was nothing more than a casual inconvenience. "You're insane," Ethan muttered, shaking off the pain in his body. Zyra smirked, her violet eyes glowing under the neon lights of the burning wreckage. "You should have read my file more carefully, Captain. I don't do easy captures." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dust-covered hair. He had a problem now. He was supposed to deliver Xyra to the Galactic Enforcement Unit, GEU, but with his ship reduced to a pile of molten junk, that wasn't happening anytime soon. "Great," he muttered, staring at her. "Now we're both stranded on this hellhole." Cyrus' smirk widened. "Not my problem, Captain. You put the cuffs on me, not the other way around." Ethan was tempted to drag her through the sand by her boots, but he took a deep breath. Losing his temper wouldn't fix anything. He tapped the comms device on his wrist, hoping for a signal. "Static. Korgith City is a no-comm zone. Genius," Xyra said, leaning back against a broken hoverbike. "Jammers everywhere. Your fancy galactic tech is useless here." Ethan clenched his fists. He needed to think fast. This planet was crawling with bounty hunters, criminals, and syndicates. If word got out that he had Xyra in cuffs, every scumbag on Vorlax 3 would try to take her, and probably kill him in the process. "Move," he ordered, grabbing her by the arm. Xyra raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" "A place where we won't get shot in the head." She laughed. "Good luck with that." The city of cutthroats. They navigated through the chaotic streets of Korgith City, weaving through narrow alleys filled with neon graffiti and holographic ads flickering from rusted buildings. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. Ethan kept his hand on his stun blaster, but he wasn't sure it would help. Every alien and outlaw they passed watched them with hungry eyes, their expressions shifting between curiosity and greed. He knew what they were thinking. A human bounty hunter. A captured outlaw. A golden opportunity. Xyra didn't make things easier. She walked like she owned the place, completely unfazed by the lurking threats around them. "You might want to stop looking so smug," Ethan muttered. "And you might want to stop looking so nervous," she shot back. "You're the one who's out of place here." She wasn't wrong. He stood out like a bright target, his standard-issue GEU armor screaming authority in a place where authority meant nothing. They reached a dimly lit cantina, its entrance guarded by two large, reptilian aliens covered in cybernetic implants. The stench of spilled drinks and burning fuel filled the air. Ethan hesitated. This place was dangerous, but they needed information and a way off the planet. The guard stepped in front of him, blocking the entrance. "No outsiders," one of them growled. Ethan tightened his grip on Xyra's cuffs. "I need to speak to Kresh Tovar." The guards exchanged glances. Then they burst into laughter. "Kresh doesn't talk to bounty hunters," the second one sneered. "Especially not ones who are about to die." Ethan's instincts screamed danger, but before he could react, Xyra moved. Even with her hands bound behind her back, she spun around, kicked one guard in the knee, and headbutted the other so hard his cybernetic eye short-circuited. Ethan barely had time to blink before the two guards collapsed in a heap. Xyra smiled sweetly at him. "After you, Captain." Ethan gritted his teeth but shoved her inside. A deadly deal. Inside, the cantina was a chaotic mess of smugglers, thieves, and mercenaries, all drinking, gambling, and exchanging stolen goods. The air buzzed with chatter in 100 alien languages, but when Ethan and Xyra walked in, the room went silent. All eyes turned to them. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. They recognized her. A towering alien with dark green skin and 4 muscular arms leaned against the bar. His black cybernetic eye glowed in the dim light. This was Kresh Tovar, the crime lord Ethan was looking for. Kresh's deep voice rumbled through the air. Well, if it isn't the galaxy's most expensive outlaw. And you, human, are you stupid or just suicidal?" Ethan ignored the insult. "I need a ship." Kresh laughed. "And I need a planet made of gold, but we don't always get what we want." Ethan clenched his fists. "I can pay." Kresh's amusement faded. He leaned forward. "With what?" Before Ethan could answer, Syra chuckled. "Oh, he has something valuable," she said, her voice dripping with mischief. Ethan gave her a sharp look. What was she up to? Syra turned back to Kresh. "How about this? You give us a ship, and I give you something you've always wanted." Kresh's cybernetic eye narrowed. "And what's that?" Syra grinned. "A chance to kill the man who captured me." Ethan's stomach dropped. The Great Escape. Ethan's heart pounded as every blaster in the cantina turned toward him. The smell of oil, sweat, and burning plasma filled the air, but all he could focus on was Kyra's smug grin as she stood beside him, still handcuffed, still causing trouble. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. "Come on, Captain," Kyra said playfully. "You didn't think I'd make this easy, did you?" Kresh Tovar, the four-armed crime lord, leaned forward, his cybernetic eye scanning Ethan like a predator sizing up its prey. The entire cantina held its breath. Then Kresh grinned. "Now that," he rumbled, his voice like rolling thunder, "is an interesting offer." Ethan's muscles tensed. His hand twitched toward his blaster, but Kresh wagged a massive finger at him. Ah, the crime lord said. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, human. You're surrounded." He was right. Dozens of mercenaries, bounty hunters, and outlaws had already drawn their weapons, aiming straight at Ethan's head. Ethan's mind raced for a plan. He had only seconds before Kresh gave the order to kill him. Syra, however, looked delighted. "So what do you think, Kresh?" she asked, tilting her head. "I get a ship, you get my dear friend here as a target practice dummy. And everyone's happy." Kresh rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Tempting. He reached for his blaster. Ethan moved first. A fight for survival. Before Kresh could pull the trigger, Ethan grabbed a metal tray from the nearest table and threw it like a frisbee. It smashed into the crime lord's face, sending him stumbling backward. The entire cantina exploded into chaos. Blaster fire lit up the air as Ethan ducked behind a table, yanking Syra down with him. She laughed. "You really are fun, Captain." Ethan scowled. "Shut up and run." Still cuffed, Syra had no choice but to follow as Ethan flipped the table and sprinted toward the back exit. Explosions rocked the room as bounty hunters fired wildly, shattering bottles and sending alien patrons diving for cover. The back door was locked. "Great," Ethan muttered. He grabbed Sarah's wrist and kicked the door open, bursting into a dark alleyway filled with steam vents and flickering neon signs. Sarah gasped mockingly. "You're strong, Captain. I'm impressed." Ethan ignored her. Footsteps thundered behind them. "They're coming," Syra said with exaggerated excitement. Ethan spotted a rusted hoverbike parked nearby. "Can you drive one-handed?" he asked. Syra grinned. "Can you shoot while holding on for dear life?" Ethan didn't have time to think. He shoved her onto the bike, jumped on behind her, and ripped the throttle open. The bike shot forward just as the bounty hunters spilled out of the cantina, firing after them. A high-speed chase. The narrow streets of Korgeth City blurred past them as Syra twisted the bike through dark alleys, dodging neon-lit signs and skidding across slick pavement. Behind them, 3 bounty hunters on hover speeders closed in fast. Ethan spun around, firing his stun blaster. The first hunter crashed into a metal dumpster, flipping over in a fiery explosion. The second hunter fired back. Plasma bolts zipped past Ethan's head, burning holes into nearby walls. "You're terrible at this," Syra teased. Ethan gritted his teeth. He aimed again and shot the second hunter's engine, sending the speeder spiraling into a food stand. One left. The last bounty hunter kicked his speeder into high gear, ramming into Ethan and Syra's bike. They spun out of control, skidding sideways toward a massive drop-off at the city's edge. Syra twisted the handlebars at the last second, and the bike jumped off the ledge, flying straight into open air. The impossible leap. For a terrifying second, they were falling. Below them, a congested hover train sped along its track. "Sarah, wakegate are you doing?" Ethan yelled. She grinned. "Having fun." The bike landed hard onto the train's roof. Ethan nearly flew off but grabbed onto the edge at the last second. He pulled himself up, gasping. Zyra, still handcuffed, sat cross-legged like it was a casual joyride. "That was fun," she said. "Let's do it again." Ethan glared. "I hate you." Zyra laughed. "That's fair." The unexpected visitor. The train sped through the city, passing towering skyscrapers and glowing billboards. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to figure out their next move. Then, a voice crackled through his comm. "Walker, do you read me?" His blood ran cold. It was Commander Bryce. "Where the hell are you? And why is half the bounty network saying you're helping Hyderabad escape?" Ethan's stomach sank. This was bad. But before he could respond, Zyra's expression changed. She tilted her head, listening to something in her own hidden earpiece. Then she smiled, but not her usual smug smile. This one was different. Dangerous. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What?" Zyra's eyes gleamed. "Oh, Captain, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Ethan's instincts screamed. Before he could react, Zyra rolled backward, kicked him in the chest, and sent him flying off the train. Betrayal or trust, falling to certain death. Ethan Walker's body spun through the air as the neon-lit city below rushed up to meet him. Wind howled in his ears, and his stomach twisted as gravity pulled him toward the endless maze of skyscrapers, traffic lanes, and flashing billboards. His instincts screamed he needed to act fast. No jetpack, no grappling hook, no plan. He gritted his teeth, scanning for anything that could break his fall. Below, a hovercar zoomed past. Ethan's mind calculated the trajectory. This was stupid. This was suicide. But he had no other choice. With a final twist of his body, he angled himself toward the vehicle and braced for impact. Futi. His body slammed onto the roof of the hovercar, the force almost knocking him unconscious. The driver, a three-eyed reptilian alien, let out a horrified scream inside the vehicle, swerving wildly. Ethan groaned, trying not to roll off. "Hey," he shouted, banging his fist against the windshield. "Pull over." The alien panicked, increasing speed instead. Ethan cursed. Behind him, a police drone activated its sirens. Great, now I'm a traffic hazard too. But he had no time to deal with that. He looked up, searching the rooftops for Xyravel, the outlaw who had just kicked him off a moving train, the outlaw he was still supposed to be capturing. And there she was, standing on top of the train, looking straight at him. Zyra's mysterious plan. Ethan's fury burned. She had betrayed him. But why? She was still handcuffed. She had been escaping with him. So what changed? Ethan reached for his blaster, aiming it at her from his unstable position on the hovercar. Zyra didn't even flinch. Instead, she raised her chained wrists and held up a tiny black device. His eyes widened. A communicator. Zyra pressed a button. A deep, distorted voice crackled through Ethan's earpiece. "Walker, you've been compromised. You need to surrender Xyravel immediately." His blood ran cold. That wasn't his commander. That wasn't anyone from the Galactic Enforcement Unit. That was someone else, someone who had hijacked his signal. Zyra smirked, tilting her head playfully. "I told you, Captain. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Before Ethan could respond, a sniper shot rang out. A deadly sniper. The glass windshield of the hovercar shattered as a high-powered plasma round barely missed Ethan's head. Sniper. Ethan instinctively ducked, rolling off the car and onto a passing transport truck. He landed hard, his muscles screaming in protest. Above, Zyra was already moving. Still handcuffed, She sprinted along the train roof, dodging incoming sniper fire like she had done this 1,000 times before. Ethan gritted his teeth and followed. With a desperate leap, he jumped from the truck onto a fire escape, scrambling up just as another plasma shot obliterated the railing where his hand had been a second ago. Whoever was shooting at them wasn't just any bounty hunter. This was an elite assassin. Thyra reached the edge of a rooftop and skidded to a stop. Nowhere left to run. Ethan caught up to her, blaster raised. "Tell me why they want you dead," he demanded, breathing hard. Thyra sighed dramatically. "I already told you, Captain. I'm too charming for this galaxy. It makes people nervous." Ethan glared. "Enough games. Who was that on my comm? Who's trying to kill us?" Before Thyra could answer, a shadow moved. A figure in sleek black armor dropped from the sky, landing between them with inhuman grace. The sniper, face to face with the hunter. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger. The assassin moved impossibly fast. A plasma blade ignited in their hand, slicing Ethan's blaster in half before he could even react. Ethan stumbled back, his heart pounding. No ordinary bounty hunter carried a plasma blade. This was a phantom, a government-trained killer. The assassin turned toward Thyra. "Vel, the Syndicate wants you erased. No more running." Thyra tilted her head. "Aw, come on. Can't we talk about this?" The phantom lunged. Thyra twisted, ducking just in time as the plasma blade slashed through the air. Sparks flew as it carved through metal piping. Ethan acted on instinct. He grabbed a nearby steel rod and swung it at the assassin's back. The phantom caught it midair, without even looking. Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh, that's not good. With a single brutal kick, the assassin sent Ethan flying backward, slamming into a rooftop vent. Thyra rolled her eyes. "See, Captain, this is why I work alone." The assassin advanced toward her again. Fast, precise, deadly. And Thyra was still handcuffed. She twisted and dodged, but the assassin was too fast. The plasma blade sliced through the chain of her cuffs, freeing her hands, but leaving a deep, burning cut along her wrist. Thyra hissed in pain, but instead of retreating, she grinned. Finally, she muttered, "Time to have some real fun." Ethan groaned, pulling himself up. "You call this fun?" Thyra winked. "Of course." Then, in a flash of movement, she grabbed the severed chain of her cuffs and whipped it around the phantom's throat. The assassin staggered back, caught off guard for the first time. Ethan saw his chance. With the last of his strength, he grabbed a plasma grenade from his belt and hurled it at the assassin's feet. Boom! The explosion lit up the entire rooftop, sending shockwaves through the city. A question of trust. Smoke filled the air. Ethan coughed, trying to regain his balance. When the dust cleared, the phantom was gone. Only Thyra stood there, brushing dust off her jacket. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. "You could have told me someone was trying to kill you before I started this mission." Thyra smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Ethan rubbed his temples. "You're going to be the death of me." "Probably." Thyra agreed. "But right now, we need to run." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Thyra pointed behind him. Ethan turned, and his heart sank. A massive fleet of syndicate ships was descending toward the city, hundreds of bounty hunters and soldiers, all after one target. Thyra gave him a wicked smile. "Told you I was popular." The truth about Thyra. The city turns against them. Ethan Walker barely had time to process the hundreds of syndicate ships now descending over Korgeth City. Floodlights cut through the night, alarms blared, and bounty hunters swarmed the rooftops like insects. Every criminal in this lawless city had just been given one order: capture Thyra. Kill anyone who gets in the way. That meant Ethan, too. Thyra, still grinning like she was enjoying this, cracked her knuckles. "Well, Captain, looks like you're stuck with me." Ethan cursed under his breath. No way out. No backup. No ship. This wasn't just a bounty hunt. This was a war zone. The desperate escape. Blaster fire rained down from mercenaries swinging onto the rooftops. Syndicate drones locked onto their heat signatures, and bounty hunters scaled the walls, cutting off all exits. Ethan and Tyra ran. They jumped between rooftops, dodged explosions, and skidded under collapsing billboards. A syndicate soldier tackled Ethan, but he spun and threw the attacker off the ledge. Zyra laughed. "See, you're getting better at this. Shut up and keep running." A bounty hunter launched a plasma net, but Sarah flipped midair, narrowly escaping its grasp. Ethan pulled out his stun blaster, but before he could fire, a syndicate fighter jet swooped down, unleashing a barrage of missiles. The rooftop exploded beneath them. They tumbled, crashing through the glass window of a high-rise and landing inside a luxury apartment. Nowhere left to hide. The apartment's owner, a two-headed alien, stared at them in shock. Zyra winked at him. "Mind if we crash here?" Before he could respond, Ethan grabbed her arm and yanked her toward the elevator. "We need to get underground," Ethan hissed. The city streets were too exposed. The bounty hunters had ships, weapons, and scanners. If they wanted to survive, they had to disappear. The elevator doors closed just as bounty hunters burst into the room. Ethan sighed in relief. "For once, we got lucky." Zyra smirked. "You sure about that?" Before Ethan could answer, the elevator suddenly stopped mid-floor. The lights flickered red. A voice came through the speakers. "There is no escape, Extraterrestrial." The ghost from Xyra's past. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a dark underground chamber. Ethan instinctively raised his weapon, but Sarah went pale. For the first time, she looked afraid. A tall figure stepped forward, his golden cybernetic eyes glowing in the shadows. His black armor was sleek, polished, and marked with the Syndicate insignia. Ethan recognized him immediately. Commander Railvox, the most ruthless bounty hunter in the galaxy. Zyra whispered, "I thought you were dead." Vox smiled, "And I thought you were smarter than this." Ethan tightened his grip on his blaster, but Vox moved with inhuman speed, disarming him in a blink. Ethan staggered back, pain shooting through his wrist. Vox stepped closer, his golden eyes locked onto Zyra. "You've been running for a long time," Vox said, "but it ends now." Zyra gritted her teeth. "You don't understand. You think I care?" Vox interrupted. "You're a traitor, Zyra. You stole from the Syndicate. You exposed secrets that should have stayed buried. And now," he smiled coldly, "the whole galaxy wants you dead." Ethan watched Sarah carefully. For the first time, her cocky attitude was gone. She wasn't just an outlaw. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was hiding something big. And whatever it was, the Syndicate was willing to burn entire planets to keep it secret. The truth about Xyravel. Zyra took a deep breath. "Fine," she said. "You want the truth." She looked at Ethan. "You want to know why the Syndicate wants me dead?" Ethan nodded slowly. Zyra closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke. "I used to work for them," she admitted. "I was one of their best agents, until I found out what they were really doing." Ethan frowned. "Which was?" Zyra met his gaze. "They were building something. A weapon. One that could wipe out entire planets in seconds." Ethan's stomach turned. "A superweapon." Zyra nodded. "And I stole the only data drive that could stop it." Ethan froze. Zyra grinned weakly. "Yeah, so that's why I'm the most wanted criminal in the galaxy." Vox sighed. "You always were stubborn, Zyra, but you won't leave this room alive." He raised his weapon, but Zyra was already moving. The final standoff. She grabbed Ethan's arm and dove behind cover as Vox opened fire. Plasma rounds tore through the air, shattering walls and consoles. Ethan fired back, But Vox was too fast, dodging with inhuman precision. "We can't win this fight," Ethan shouted. Zyra smirked. "You always say that." She pressed a button on her wrist. The walls exploded outward, revealing the hidden escape tunnel. Ethan blinked. "You had that the whole time." Zyra shrugged. "Gotta have a backup plan." Before Vox could recover, they leaped into the tunnel, sliding down a dark chute into the unknown. The last stand. Hunted in the dark. Deep in the underground tunnels beneath Korgeth City, Ethan Walker paced back and forth, trying to wrap his head around what had just happened. In less than an hour, he had gone from being a Galactic Enforcement Unit, GEU, officer on a mission to a fugitive wanted by both the Syndicate and his own people. And it was all because of Zyra. She leaned casually against the damp sewer wall, arms crossed, watching him struggle with reality. "I get it, Captain," she said with a smirk. "You're having an existential crisis, but we don't really have time for that." Ethan shot her a glare. "Do you even care that my entire life just went down the drain?" Zyra shrugged. "Not really. But hey, welcome to the club." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had spent years following orders, doing the right thing, protecting the galaxy from criminals like her. And now, the people he worked for had just branded him a traitor. Not because of anything he did, but because he knew too much. He exhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus. Freaking out wouldn't help. "Okay," he said, "let's say I believe you. Let's say the Syndicate really is building a weapon capable of destroying entire planets. Why not just give them the data drive and save yourself?" Zyra's expression changed, just for a second. A flash of something real. Pain, regret, fear. Then she hid it behind her usual smirk. "Because, Captain, if they get their hands on this, millions of innocent people will die." Ethan stared at her. He had been hunting her for weeks, thinking she was a selfish outlaw, a dangerous criminal. But maybe, just maybe, she had been running for the right reasons. The hunters arrive. The low rumbling noise echoed through the tunnel. Ethan stiffened. Footsteps. Metal boots. Dozens of them. "They found us," he whispered. Zyra grinned. "Took them long enough." She pulled out a small handheld device and pressed a button. Suddenly, holographic blueprints lit up in the air. Ethan blinked. "Is that the layout of this entire sewer system?" "Yep." She studied the map for a second, then pointed at a narrow maintenance shaft. "There. That leads to an old smuggler's tunnel. We get there, we get out." Ethan nodded. "All right, let's move." A plasma bolt blasted into the wall inches from his head. "There they are," the voice shouted. The chase was on. Escape through fire. Zyra and Ethan bolted down the tunnel, the air boiling with plasma fire as Syndicate soldiers rained shots after them. Ethan fired back over his shoulder, but they were outnumbered. Way outnumbered. "They're gonna box us in," he shouted. Zyra smirked. "Then let's make them regret it." She whipped a grenade from her belt and tossed it behind them. Boom! The tunnel collapsed in an explosion of rock and fire, cutting off their pursuers. Ethan coughed through the dust. "You carry explosives now." Zyra shrugged. "A girl's gotta have hobbies." They reached the maintenance shaft and climbed up the rusted ladder. Ethan shoved the grate open, and they emerged into a crumbling warehouse, filled with rusted crates and abandoned machinery. For a second, Ethan thought they were safe. Then, a deep voice echoed through the room. "Going somewhere. Commander Vox returns." Ethan and Zyra spun around. Standing at the far end of the warehouse, his golden cybernetic eyes gleaming, was Commander Rail Vox. Dozens of Syndicate enforcers surrounded him, weapons aimed. Ethan swore under his breath. Zyra just smirked. "I was wondering when you'd show up again." Vox stepped forward, his expression cold. "Give me the drive." Zyra. Zyra tilted her head. "How about no?" Vox sighed. I expected that. Then he snapped his fingers. From the shadows, GEU soldiers stepped forward. Ethan's own people. Ethan's stomach dropped. Commander Bryce, his former boss, stared at him. Walker, you don't have to do this. Turn her in, and we'll clear your name. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. That's a lie, Teixeira said softly. Bryce didn't deny it. Ethan exhaled. So that's it, huh? I was loyal for years, and now I'm just disposable. Bryce's face was unreadable. We can't let the syndicate's secrets get out. Ethan laughed bitterly. So you'd rather let them build a planet-killing weapon? This is bigger than you, Bryce said. Do the smart thing. Step aside. Ethan glanced at Tyra. She was watching him carefully, like she already knew his answer. Ethan sighed. You know what? Screw this. Then he punched Bryce in the face. The final fight. Chaos erupted. Ethan grabbed Bryce's blaster, spun, and fired at the syndicate soldiers. Tyra flipped onto a crate, using the high ground to take out two enforcers. Vox drew his plasma blade, cutting through a metal container like it was paper. You can't win, he growled. Tyra grinned. Yeah, watch me. She charged at him, dodging his blade at the last second and landing a solid kick to his side. Ethan covered her, taking out syndicate snipers from the upper levels. But the enemy kept coming. Too many. Ethan's blaster beeped, out of ammo. Zara glanced at him. We need an exit. Ethan spotted something. A rusted old cargo ship in the corner of the warehouse. If that thing still flies, we have a shot. Zara grinned. Then let's steal a ship. They ran toward it, dodging fire. But Vox was faster. He tackled Zyra, slamming her into the ground. She gasped as his plasma blade hovered inches from her throat. Any last words? Vox asked. Zyra smirked. Yeah. Bye. She kicked him hard in the knee, making him stumble. Ethan smashed the ship's controls, activating its engines. The warehouse rumbled as the ship roared to life. Zyra leaped inside, and Ethan slammed the hatch shut. Vox's furious shouts were drowned out as they blasted into the sky, leaving Korgeth City behind. The final choice. Nowhere left to hide. The stolen cargo ship rocketed through deep space, leaving Korgeth City and the chaos behind. Ethan Walker sat in the co-pilot's chair, watching the stars blur past. His hands were still shaking, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. In just one night, he had gone from being a respected officer of the Galactic Enforcement Unit, GEU, to being a fugitive, hunted by both the GEU and the Syndicate. And it was all because of Cyravel. She sat across from him, calm as ever, flipping a knife between her fingers like none of this was a big deal. Ethan exhaled sharply. So what's the plan? Zara didn't look up. We take the fight to them. Ethan scoffed. You mean we take on the most powerful crime syndicate in the galaxy with one stolen ship, 2 fugitives, and 0 backup? Zara smirked. You make it sound impossible. It is impossible. Good, she said, stretching. I like a challenge. Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. Why did he ever think teaming up with her was a good idea? But then he thought about what he'd seen. The Syndicate wasn't just a criminal empire. They were building a planet-killing weapon. And the GEU wasn't stopping them. They were helping. Ethan clenched his fists. He had spent his life following orders, believing he was fighting for justice. But now he realized the real enemy had been giving him orders all along. He glanced at Tyra. Where is the weapon? Tyra leaned forward, finally serious. It's on Station Omega, deep in the Outer Rim. The Syndicate built it inside an old mining facility. It's heavily guarded, locked down tight. Ethan narrowed his eyes. And you know this how? She hesitated. Then, for the first time, she spoke softly. Because I helped build it. The truth about Cyravel. Ethan froze. Zyra looked away, gripping the edge of the console. "The Syndicate recruited me when I was young," she said quietly. "They trained me, turned me into their best agent. I did terrible things for them. I believed in them. Until one day." She took a deep breath. "Until I saw what they were planning. What that weapon could do." Her violet eyes locked onto his. "I couldn't be part of that. So I ran." Ethan exhaled. He had spent weeks chasing her, believing she was nothing but a criminal. Now, he realized, she wasn't running to save herself. She was running to stop them. He sighed. "I hate that you're making me care about this." Zyra smirked. "I have that effect on people." Ethan shook his head. "So how do we destroy it?" Zyra's smirk widened. "We crash their party." Infiltrating Station Omega. The journey to Station Omega took 3 days, and in that time, Ethan and Zyra planned every detail. They couldn't just storm in. They would be outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But Zyra had a better idea. "We won't sneak in," she said. "We'll walk right through the front door." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's the dumbest idea I've ever heard." Zyra grinned. "You haven't heard the best part yet." The plan. Step 1. They would disguise themselves as bounty hunters, delivering a captured Zyra to the Syndicate. Step 2. Once inside, Zyra would trigger a security breach, shutting down the station's defenses for a short window. Step 3. Ethan would plant explosives in the core of the station, blowing the whole thing to hell. It was insane, risky, likely to fail. Ethan sighed. "You really don't do easy missions, do you?" Zyra smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" The last stand. When they arrived at Station Omega, Ethan tightened his stolen bounty hunter armor and dragged Zyra forward, her hands chained in cuffs. They walked through the main docking bay, surrounded by Syndicate enforcers, bounty hunters, and war droids. Zyra kept her head down. "Remember, act like you belong." Ethan grunted. "I hate this plan." A Syndicate officer stepped forward. "State your business." Ethan tightened his grip on Zyra's chains. "Bounty delivery." "Zyra Vel." The officer frowned, scanning Zyra's face. "Didn't expect you to get caught so easily, Vel," he sneered. Zyra sighed dramatically. "Yeah, well, not my best day." The officer smirked. "You'll be dead by morning." Zyra winked. "I wouldn't bet on that." The officer nodded toward the security gates. "Take her to the containment wing." Ethan nodded, guiding Zyra forward. They were inside. Now, the real mission began. The explosion that shook the galaxy. Everything happened fast. Zyra broke out of her cuffs, knocking out the nearest guard. Ethan slipped away, planting explosives at the power core. Security alarms blared as Syndicate forces swarmed the facility. Ethan's comms crackled. "Captain, I really hope you're done, because this place is getting hostile." Ethan finished setting the last charge. "We're good. Meet me at the docks." But as he turned, Vox appeared. The commander lunged, slamming Ethan into a console. "You think you can destroy us, Walker?" Vox hissed. "You are no thing." Ethan growled. "Maybe. But at least I'm not a murderer." Vox sneered. "You will be after today." He raised his plasma blade. Bang! A shot rang out. Vox staggered backward, clutching his chest. Zyra stood at the doorway, blaster smoking. She grinned. "Miss me?" Ethan groaned. "Took you long enough." She tossed him a detonator, ready to blow this place to hell. Ethan pressed the button. Boom! The end of the Syndicate's reign. The explosion ripped through Station Omega, sending fire and debris into space. Zyra and Ethan barely made it back to their stolen ship, the shockwave nearly tearing them apart. They watched from orbit as the Syndicate's superweapon burned, breaking apart into pieces. Zyra exhaled. "We did it." Ethan nodded. "Yeah. For the first time in years, he felt free. The final choice. As the dust settled, Ethan turned to Exira. "So what now?" She smirked. "We could lay low, start fresh, or—" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Or—" Zyra's grin widened. "Or we take down the rest of the syndicate." Ethan laughed. "You're insane." Zyra shrugged. "Yeah, but you like it." He sighed, shaking his head. "All right, Outlaw. Let's raise some hell." Their ship blasted into the stars, toward their next adventure.